it's Anne at Martin House Flowers and Eddie. So in today's video, I wanted to show you some of our fall cleanup. I was cleaning up my hostas. It was Hosta La Vista time. My friend Teresa came up with that one. And also I did some cleanup around the roses, got rid of some of the foliage and leaves that had black spot. I still have to do some of the preparing of the roses with regard to adding compost around the base, which is what I did last year to help them overwinter. But I also took the white geraniums remaining from the patio containers and repotted them into hanging baskets. So they're now going to overwinter here in the greenhouse. And lastly, if you stay to the end, I potted up some clay pots with spring blooming bulbs, some grape hyacinths, and some tulips. So I hope you enjoy this video, and if you liked it, I hope you will consider subscribing. So thanks for joining me in the garden. In today's video, I decided to share with you some of the fall cleanup I needed to do around the garden. And of course, I couldn't help but go around and take a look at my roses that are still going strong and blooming through to the end of October. New Dawn is continuing to climb and put out new buds and still has a lot of fragrance. She's absolutely a pleasure to have in the garden this year. This is her second season. I just planted her in May or June of last spring. And unfortunately, Eden, just across on the other side on the left, has not bloomed since the first time early this spring. So there's Eden. Eden has only climbed about 6 feet versus New Dawn that's gone all the way around the arbor. And this rose is incredible. This was the rose that was eaten by the rabbit all the way down to the ground. And I covered her with a cloche, and luckily she recovered. So it was time to clean up the hostas. Yesterday, I took a look at the hostas down the east side of the house, and as you can see back there, I have some pulmonaria that I planted this spring, which kind of got overpowered a little bit by the hostas, so I've been debating on whether to keep them there. So I won't be touching my hydrangeas. Those are big leaf hydrangeas, endless summer, that I'll prune in the spring. So these little hostas here were the ones that told me that it was time to clean them up. I do have a few hostas on the back patio as well. There are 4 of them back there. So I waited till the shade came around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I started just snipping away. It was a little bit awkward snipping away holding the camera with my left hand, but after snipping away the hostas, I discovered that I could easily just grab a bunch and take my Japanese knife, especially to the softer ones. I did have someone say to me that they don't do anything with their hostas, that they let them just basically rot and stay on the plant, and presumably they clean them up in the spring. Excuse me, but the reason for cleaning up the hostas in the fall is if you let them go to the point where they get yellow and slimy, like the ones that you saw, they will tend to carry a lot of bacteria and fungus, which, I personally don't want that going back into the plant or the soil around it. So I always like to clean them up. And the nice thing is now you can see my pulmonaria there. So I find that it just gives the area just a nice clean start for spring once you pull away all the dead leaves. And you'll see there that there's some spider webs, and so that's the other thing, is you want to, you know, expose any kind of bug damage or, you know, spider mites or anything that might be hovering underneath those heavy leaves. So I find that doing this in the fall just gives your hostas a nice fresh start in the spring. I've never had too many health issues with my hostas. The other thing too is in the spring, I come around when they're still really low to the ground, and I spread a circle of sluggo to keep the slugs at bay for the rest of the spring and summer. So in the greenhouse, you'll notice that it's getting a little fuller. We decided after sitting in the greenhouse last evening to carry in, Greg decided to carry in my 3 large pots that have the obelisks and the mandevillas growing in them. I had debated for a long time, I think I was mentioning in my previous videos, as to whether I would repot these mandevillas, but because I've been climbing, these were planted in July, and that's why they're not as tall as they might be, because I did have my sweet peas planted from seed growing in these pots, but I wanted to be able to potentially save my mandevillas over winter, so overwinter them in the greenhouse. So now I'm going to have to think of where I'm going to plant my sweet peas, because they did really well in those containers. So yeah, that's something to think about, because I planted sweet peas in the ground last year around the arbor and they didn't do very well. The only place that they liked was in these containers with the obelisks, so I'll have to rethink that. So the geraniums are doing nicely in here, and I also brought in one of my patio tables there to use as a plant stand. The Meyer lemon tree continues to do well. I've been cutting on that basil, and I've brought in my pitchers, more of my pitchers and my little vases to store. And I pulled out the hooks because I'm going to use those hanging baskets that I pulled out the strawberries from. I'm going to later today, fill those and plant a couple of the geraniums that are on the patio and see if I can overwinter those. And because they're white, they'll look really nice in the evenings hanging. So the other day, I also went in here and finally cleaned off this potting bench. And I cut back some of these annuals. African daisies are still doing well. And a couple of my other cosmos here still blooming a little bit. I'll probably cut that back soon. So here are the geraniums that, after pulling out all the other annuals, cleaning up these 2 square pots, and here of course is my supertunias that I'm debating on whether they're ready to go, because I will put some bulbs in there. So this geranium was really overtaken by the African daisies that I planted in here. But as you can see, there's still some greenery on the leaves. So I'm going to dig this out and plant it in that hanging basket. And this one here, you know, was the African daisies that I planted around here did not germinate. So this geranium was able to really expand, and it started from one little 4-inch pot, believe it or not. And these dwarf Norway spruces are going to be planted. This one will go to the left of that lilac tree, and there'll be one on there because that's a deciduous tree, and even though they're dwarf Norway spruces, I think they'll grow to at least 5 feet tall, maybe 6 feet. So I continue to clean up my marigolds in here, and we still are harvesting our peppers. We have some hot peppers and we have some datil peppers, and there's some status there that I left behind. And I'm starting to throw some of the old soil from the pots into these beds that I will, recycle and be able to continue to add compost for the spring. And I did cut a few blooms on the snapdragons, and we bought some at our local hardware store. We bought some more of this landscaping stone, and Greg just sort of laid them there. He'll have to dig them dig a little bit of a trench to level them into the ground. But snapdragons are still pushing out some blooms, not that many, but I'm thinking I'm not going to yank them all out. I'm going to let some of them just overseed or overwinter in here and see if some of them will come back. I'll just leave this bed here as my snapdragon bed. So I haven't seen the bunny in the last couple days, but I think I'm going to just see what overwinters and if any of the seed fall back into the bed and grow in. And then in the spring, I'll do a cleanup, because snapdragons being a cool flower, I will actually start my seedlings really early, probably in January or February, and put them into the ground early on. And the bachelor's buttons, like, look at the blue. Oh, so beautiful. I cut a little wildflower bunch and put them on the kitchen table. My dahlias. These were planted from seed, and they're just a mix that I mentioned in my last video. And what do you guys do with your dahlias from seed? Do you collect seeds from here? My bloomstruck hydrangeas are doing nicely, and these were the hostas that I cut back. And now you can see the hellebore that I planted in the middle there. So the nice thing about the hellebore being there is early spring it'll bloom beautifully, and there's one in between these hostas. So these are the last two hostas that I did not cut back, because they're still doing really well. So these daylilies, Stelladora daylilies coming up, I thought about cleaning them up, because I will plan to replace those in the spring, probably putting some roses that I pre-ordered. And you see my little limes and bobos hydrangeas are starting to really turn and lose their foliage, and flowers are very brown at this stage. More daylilies there. And yesterday, after cleaning up the hostas, I came in here and I removed all of the foliage or leaves that had black spot on them. You'll notice some of them are still doing really nicely, but if you notice some of the canes, my husband had asked me, why are there leaves missing from these canes down below, and there's some up top? And that's because I removed those leaves, and I find if I get at it fast enough, they're not going to shed and put any of the spotted or black spot leaves into the ground, and won't spread any fungus. And we did pick up a few bags of compost, so I wanted to put around the base of all my roses some compost. It helps overwinter them and give any extra nutrients and keep the moisture intact for the long winter ahead. Last year I used the Heirloom Roses mint compost, but this year I thought I'd save some money and use just regular compost. And there's another rose there where I defoliated quite a bit. And I can't believe all these blooms that are still coming up. There's Midas Touch there. So that's on my list of cleanup. I've defoliated as much as I could, and I'll continue to do that until it's time to cut back the roses. This container here with snapdragons, it used to have a geranium, and it got overpowered by the snapdragon, so I was just looking in there to see if I could find it, but I think it's gone. I have the bag of compost there to go around the few roses I have in this south bed. And there's my peony from bare root that's looking a little bit golden. I'll probably cut it back. Let me know, do you guys cut back your peonies before the fall hits? I've heard that it's a good idea to do that. The same reason that you cut back your hostas. You don't want any fungus leaves falling to the ground and affecting any new growth for the spring. So you'll see here that I did end up pulling out a couple of the Sweet Romance lavenders because they didn't make it. I don't know what happened. I had planted, I think, 5 along the path. So I'm going to have to replace 2 of them, get 2 new Sweet Romance in the spring. This one was doing really well. I just gave it a bit of a haircut, cut all the blooms. And this container soon is going to be pretty much done. And there's Tchaikovsky. I thought I got all the buds, cut off all the spent buds, but it looks like I have a few more to cut. And there's still more blooms pushing through. Next to the Poet's Wife, we have the Quickfire Fab hydrangeas that have turned pretty brown at this stage. The flowers are all pretty crispy, and some Quickfires down there. And then we're back to the back patio, and I thought I'd take a little look at the back of the greenhouse. The Let's Dance Sky View that had a little bit of a struggle with heat, and I only got 1 rebloom out of the 3 in the back here later in the summer. And the String Theory Amsonia, such beautiful foliage for fall. And I finally did make another chicken wire cage for that turtle head. The Firelight Tidbits that were planted earlier this summer didn't actually bloom this year, so hopefully next year they bloom. And we're back to the front of the greenhouse. I do have that topiary spruce that I think I will have to stay, it'll have to stay out front, and maybe I'll cover it up. So before it was too late, I decided to dig up these white geraniums. One of them was pretty sad looking, but there was still some green leaf on it, so I didn't think it was completely dead. It was pretty easy to just dig up the roots, and I plan to replant it into those hanging wire baskets with the cocoa fiber liner. And there are a couple methods that you can overwinter your geraniums. One of them is a dry root method, where you would pull it up like that, remove all the soil, and simply put it inside a paper bag with just a little bit of peat moss. Some people just put them in a paper bag and keep them in the basement, fold up the paper bag and just keep them in the basement over the winter, and check on them every so often. You can spray some water on them to keep the roots somewhat moist, but definitely not sopping wet. And then in the spring, you just repot them. So it tells you that the roots of a geranium are very hardy and can definitely overwinter quite successfully. So since I have a greenhouse, I decided to just simply repot it into the hanging basket and hang it in the greenhouse. So I added some fresh potting mix to the base of the basket, probably about 2 inches of soil, and put the bare root in, basically, since I had pulled it right out of the soil of the other pot, and just started filling some new soil around it. And these hanging baskets are a little bit shallow, not ideal, I found out with a lot of annuals. You tend to need to use annuals that have shallow roots for these types of hanging baskets, because there's not a lot of area for the roots to sort of grow. But since this is just one geranium, and I really had nothing to lose, since, you know, typically these would just die off by the end of the season, and in the spring or summer you'd buy yourself a new geranium. So this is the first time, to be quite honest, the fact that I'm repotting them and trying to overwinter them. So we'll see what happens. I'll report on this in the spring and summer. Obviously, we'll see how they do over the winter. I'm planning to not overwater them, but still water them, not on a daily basis the way I do in the summertime. But we'll see how they do. It's important to always deadhead your geraniums, and if there's any yellow foliage, clip those off. But I think with this fresh soil, they should have a pretty good start and should do well in the greenhouse over the winter. So once I finished filling the hanging basket with some fresh potting mix, I checked the plant to see if there were any spent blooms and snipped those off. Any leaves that looked a little bit yellow or golden, snipped those off, and just compacted the soil as much as possible, watered both baskets, and Greg was kind enough to add a third set of hooks and the eye bolt that fits into the groove up in the ceiling of the greenhouse. And soon I was able to hang all three of the baskets. So after repotting the geraniums, it was time to plant some bulbs in my clay pots. I decided to use my Fanola double late tulips in this pot in the center, put 3 bulbs in the center because this pot was probably only about 5 inches deep. I used my handy dibber, and since there was already some soil, decent potting soil in there, and I put the 3 tulip bulbs in the center. Ideally, when planting tulips in the ground, they want them to be about 6 inches deep. This is an 18-inch tulip, but since it's in a container, I planted them as deep as I could in this particular one that's about 5 to 6 inches deep. So I put the 3 tulips at the center at the very bottom, and then about 4 inches deep, you want to plant your smaller bulbs. I had bought a big bag of these muscari or grape hyacinths, so most of them I had planned to put into containers. So these particular muscari are to be planted 4 inches deep and about 3 inches apart. But again, I break that rule in containers. I tend to mass plant them so that they come up really full in the containers. So I did plant them about 4 inches deep, a couple inches higher than the tulips that are in the center. And I just went around the perimeter about an inch and a half to 2 inches apart. And I think I did two layers or 2 circles of the muscari. As with planting bulbs in the ground, you also place the flat side of the bulb to the bottom and the pointy side up. I really love this dibber tool for planting bulbs, especially when you're working with a good soft potting mix, or if you're in a bed that has a lot of compost and your soil is nice and soft. It makes it super easy. The measure on the metal portion there goes to 4 to 5 inches, so it just makes the perfect hole, especially for smaller bulbs. And you just make your hole and you drop in your bulbs. It's just the greatest tool. I highly recommend them for planting tulips and smaller bulbs like hyacinths, grape hyacinths, or even narcissus. I believe I used them as well, as long as the ground wasn't clay. For this next smaller pot, I decided to just mass plant the hyacinths, the grape hyacinths. I have a couple of these shallow bowls, and I had some gravel left from last year's bowls where I also had some of these muscari or grape hyacinths planted. So I decided to put some of that gravel at the base of each of the pots. If you have some gravel, it's always a great idea to put them at the base of your clay pots. It just increases the drainage, or just improves the drainage, especially if they're sitting in a garage or anywhere that, you know, with containers, you always want to improve your drainage. So for bulbs especially, it really helps to have gravel or pea gravel, whatever you have on hand, or even some sand. It's always, you know, a good idea to improve your drainage. So I moved pretty quickly. I planted these small muscari probably about 1.5 inches apart, about 3 inches deep on this one. Looking back, I think these ones are pretty shallow, but they should be fine. I planted in these shallow bowls similarly last year, and they turned out fine, although I do believe they were smaller muscari. So we'll see how this goes. Since this was a deeper pot, I decided to repeat the tulips in the center and then have the muscari around the perimeter. Thinking about it now, I could have actually put more of the tulips at the base, about 6 inches down, and then layered them like a lasagna pot, as some people call it, with the muscari. But I decided to just put 3 in the center since the tulips were, again, the double late finolas, and it wasn't that wide of a pot. It was deeper than it was wide. So I decided just to use the principle of the 3 tulips in the middle and the muscari grape hyacinths around the perimeter. And I think I did, again, 2 circles of muscari around the perimeter. So again, after planting the tulips about 6 inches deep, I went in and put another 2 inches of potting mix and then proceeded to plant the muscari about 4 inches deep, and then layered again with another 4 inches of potting mix, which brought me to the end of that bag. So I was almost finished for the afternoon. I just had one last pot. I decided to take that pot that was in front of the greenhouse that had the Supertunias bubblegum that were looking a little bit tired. Finally, the last clay pot. I've had these clay pots from Canada for so many years. They were a three-pack, 3-size pots, and I think I only have 2 left, the smallest and the largest one that's on the patio. So I decided to plant some tulips in the middle, again, same finola, double late tulips in the center, and then I was coming in around the perimeter with the smaller muscari or grape hyacinths. Again, it went really quickly using the dibber, punching in the holes and then just dropping in the little bulbs. So thank you for watching me as I did my fall cleanup and did some repotting of my geraniums, and finally all of the containers that I filled with spring bulbs. I am so excited to see these bloom in the spring. And normally I would put these in the garage, but I decided, since it's pretty cool in the greenhouse, to store them here for now. And if they happen to sprout out early, that's okay with me.